This is what happens when you think about this for 100 hours a week for 7 years. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Marcel Petitpas, CEO and co-founder at Parakeeto, and this is Real Talk, Estimates and Agency Metrics.
The next question is from Reddit. What do you base resource forecasting on? Should it be historical data, a magic 8-ball, pure optimism? And the answer is, it depends. The first question I want to ask is, well, what kind of forecasting are you doing? Is it more of a bottom-up forecast where you're really going to be focused on a lot of precise information, specific tasks, how long those tasks are expected to take, how many hours a person has in a given day? It might be a little bit difficult to have a lot of historical data to base things on, because when you break things down to the task level, it's very hard for you to say, can I find another 10 tasks that look just like this one that I can compare this to? So you're going to be basing perhaps on some historical data, but in a lot of cases, you're going to be breaking things down to a degree where it's easier to make assumptions. They're going to be directionally accurate. And even if there is a bit of a splay there, it's not that material. Now, the other side of that is, are you doing more of a top-down forecast? And we're thinking here about the executive team asking questions like, what do the next 6 months look like if we do or don't win these clients, or if we do or don't make these hires? And here, precision is not nearly as important to getting to an accurate answer. And you're not really thinking in terms of tasks in so much as you're thinking about types of work more broadly. And in those situations, it is much easier and much more likely that you can develop helpful sets of data historically that are going to allow you to build heuristics to give you a quick answer and create a lot of efficiency there. For example, how much design time do we spend on average in our website projects? And what is the relationship between $1 of budget for a website project and an hour of design? That data set is so much easier to create because you're much more likely to have consistency across many different projects. And if you're installing your tooling right and keeping your data clean, that can be a place where you get a lot of leverage out of historical data. So at the end of the day, if you have historical data, that's great. If you don't, you're probably going to be relying on some best guesses. And just remember to consider that you don't necessarily need a lot of precision to get an accurate answer to your question. And also, don't conflate perfection and accuracy. And remember that all models are wrong and some are useful, and forecasting is just a model. This question is from a Float live session. What are the lesser known risks of using resource utilization as a planning metric? Oh, I really like this question. There are a lot of risks. I always call utilization the dark saber of agency metrics because I'm a Star Wars nerd. So it comes with great power, but it can do great damage in the wrong hands, right? It can be counterproductive in a whole bunch of different ways. So I'll start with, just different levels of the organization and the things that we typically see. One of the first mistakes I see agencies make is they start holding their individual contributors accountable to utilization rates and using them as a performance metric. So if I'm a designer or a copywriter or an engineer on the team, every week I have a manager saying, hey, you didn't hit your utilization target this week. Why is that? And what that essentially creates is a set of incentives that is completely counterproductive in the business. A lot of people will start padding their time just to artificially hit their utilization target. When there isn't enough work to do, they'll just start pretending that it took them more time to do something than it actually did. That's obviously not good. A, because they weren't productive and now your time tracking data isn't very reliable. The second thing that tends to happen here is chronic over-servicing. So if somebody is maybe indexing extremely high on integrity, they won't lie on their timesheets, but then they'll just spend a whole bunch of time making the logo bigger and smaller, whether that was necessary or not, or finding all kinds of things to do for clients, which in the short term might seem like it's a good thing, but can have a lot of adverse effects over time. Again, decreasing your level of visibility into how long it takes to do things, increasing your client's perception of what they should expect to get for what they're paying for your service, and in some cases, permanently changing the perception that the team has on what the scope of this engagement actually is, especially when you start to get busier. Generally, the other layer that gets increased here is there's chronic busyness and there's an over prioritization of busyness when project managers are being told to measure utilization or to hold people accountable to utilization. And so depending on how you've defined utilization, that might mean a whole bunch of internal work is being piled onto people's plates, whether it's productive or not. And there's not necessarily as much thought being put into, is this actually making any sense? So the long and short is utilization can lead to a lot of negative things. And generally, the deeper into the organization you push that as a performance metric, the worse things are. So I would encourage you to keep this as a management metric, expose it to the leadership team, to delivery management, maybe project management, and try to make sure you're always counterbalancing it with at least one metric that focuses on project efficiency, whether that's an average billable rate, a project profitability metric, or something like that, that helps balance the incentives that these people are exposed to in terms of their metrics. So, okay, this one is a fairly common question in my field, which is what metrics and historical data should every agency be using to improve estimation accuracy? And I would say there's two really important ones. The first is a measure of project efficiency. Average billable rate is my favorite. You could call this effective hourly rate, but essentially what you're asking is, what is the amount of money that we earn for every hour of effort that we put into this? And ideally, you could compare that to what you thought was going to happen at the start. That just gives you a really simple measure on, did we spend more or less time than we expected to on this thing? And did it make us a decent amount of money? If you want to go a level deeper, you would start to look at estimated versus actual hours. I think the mistake a lot of people make here is they go straight to the task level. But I would encourage you to start with a little bit of abstraction here and group those things up to segments that align to how you think about capacity. So for most firms, this is going to be in what we would call role categories. For example, design, project management, copywriting, strategy. So really start comparing estimated versus actual hours at that level without necessarily getting all the way into the details of every single task. And you can often build really, really useful data sets there and get yourself having the right conversations about how to correct issues in estimation, issues in process, issues and the things that create discrepancies between estimated and actual hours without necessarily having to chase down this highly detailed and often very noisy data set of task-based estimated versus actual hours. This question was submitted during a live event at Float. So for agencies, how do you balance accurately estimating the work with the costs we think are needed to win the project? So I am maybe reading between the lines a little bit here, but the way that this question is being asked to me already signals what the problem is. There shouldn't be any tension between accurately estimating the project and then selling it at a price that you think you're going to win at. But what this tells me is that this agency probably suffers from the same problem that a lot of other firms that we talk to suffers from, which is a way of pricing that intrinsically links the scope of the project to the price and often discourages or doesn't allow for discounting, right? So the tension then becomes, well, if we try to charge the client for all the time it's going to take, then the client will never say yes to the budget. So we now have to pretend that it's going to take less time to get this thing done to fit into the client's budget. But the truth is, you should both be completely realistic about how much time it's going to take, and then also approach the pricing conversation in a way that takes into account what the client's budget actually is. And if that results in the fact that you are selling this at a discount, then that's the reality. But not doing that and lying to yourself and to your team about what you think the scope actually is, it doesn't do anything for the client. It changes nothing for them. They get the same outcome. They get the thing that they want at the price that they want. But it's really detrimental to the business because now you're coming back to your team with a set of expectations that you know are not realistic. And chances are you're going to forget that they weren't realistic 6 months from now when the project's done. And now everybody's upset that it went way over budget and it feels like a failure. So I would say to you, maybe reevaluate how you arrive at scopes and price, because those things should not have any tension. And that tension sounds like it's actually a product of the method that you use for arriving at those two things. Okay, a user in the resource planning subreddit asks, I track 12 different utilization metrics, but I still can't predict anything. What metrics matter? I'm so sorry to hear that you're tracking 12 different kinds of utilization. And I'm even more sorry to hear that you still don't feel like you understand what you should be looking at. So I feel for you. And therein lies the issue with agency metrics. You asked 10 different agencies how they measure utilization, you get 10 different answers, and it doesn't really help you figure out what that should look like for you. So the first thing that you should understand here is that uncertainty is inherent in your business. So you mentioned the word predict, and I am going to latch onto that for a moment, because if you are going into business expecting that at any point you'll be able to predict what's going to happen, I'm sorry to tell you that that's not how it works. However, you can equip yourself with models that allow yourself to make more confident decisions and make decisions that hopefully align with your strategy and your appetite for risk as an entrepreneur or as an executive team. And that's really the goal of using metrics. And so the way that I would think about this in your position is, number one, you want to start with a model of your business so that you understand what good actually looks like. Your business model is a function of how much capacity you buy from your team, multiplied by the percentage of that capacity that you can use to earn money by doing client work, multiplied by the average amount of revenue that you earn for every hour of effort that is spent. Right. So one of the challenges that we hear from people is they start measuring metrics, they get a result back, but then they're actually not sure how to interpret the result. They don't know if it's good or if it's bad, if they should be trying to get that number to be higher or lower. So the first step is understand what your targets are, and those should be specific to your context. You do that by building a model of your agency. The second step is you should start forecasting, and that solves the problem of, are you planning to succeed in the first place? because there's no amount of tracking actuals that's going to fix that issue that you're planning to fail, but you're not aware of it. So this is where forecasting becomes really important, knowing what you expect to spend, how much money you expect to bring in, how busy you expect your team to be, and how that compares to the expectations that you establish in your model. And then the last piece is install some feedback loops so you can figure out where your assumptions and reality are really far apart and start to tighten those things up over time, which will give you more confidence and allow you to predict more accurately what you think is going to take place. And so to answer the question specifically, what metrics should be paid attention to? On the finance side, I think there's really like 4 things that matter. The first is what we call agency gross income, which is how much money you collect after stripping out the stuff that doesn't belong to you, like advertising spend and print budgets and third parties. So how much money is actually coming into the business that you now need to earn with your time? The second is delivery margin, which is what percentage of that money is left after you've spent the money that it costs to get things done. So after your team has actually spent the time to build the website, to deliver the campaign to the client, to design the logo, now what's left? The next thing would be what percentage of that money goes to covering your overhead. And we generally want to try to keep that to between 20 and 30% of your income. And then lastly, your operating profit as a percentage of agency gross income. And we generally want to see that be at 20% or higher. So the benchmarks here are delivery margin, try to keep that above 50%, overhead expenses, try to keep those below 30%, and you should be happy. And then on the ops side, there's really 3 things that control that delivery margin. Those are average billable rate or some kind of margin on your projects, right? So that tells you, are we earning money efficiently on the work that we're doing? The second is utilization, which is, are we keeping our team busy enough? And are we leaving a bunch of capacity essentially to not be monetized? And then the last one is average cost per hour, which is, are we being efficient about the kinds of people that are doing the work and the cost of those people? Those 3 levers are what controls delivery margin. Delivery margin is what creates the foundation for profitability. So those are the metrics. And again, before you jump to tracking all those things, I would just start by building a model of your firm and forecasting to make sure you're even planning to be successful in the first place. Would I really be a consultant if I didn't answer at least one of these questions with it depends? There's so many tools that are set up to be like, oh, well, like if you just keep your estimated hours up to date on all 700 of these tasks, then like all your reports will be perfect. It's like, great. Who's ever done that ever? The answer is no one. This is completely impractical.